If I told you there was a naval leader who in the 16th century was scoring major victories against overwhelming odds, who was in constant trials and tribulations with his own senior leadership, often the smartest person in the room, often the one who was right, you'd probably think, listening to my accent, I was talking about Drake or someone like that. But I'm not. I'm talking about the Marquis de Santa Cruz, Alvaro de Bazan. I'm talking about a man who was, in many ways, greater than the nation he was serving, and is remembered in the way he is because he outshone many of the people who should have been shining. He was not just a career naval officer, he was a career in terms of his family were career naval officers. He was a true counterpart to Lord Howard of Effingham. It's a very similar system. And it's one of the interesting things of what would have happened if these two men had fought, because they have quite a similar operating style. Santa Cruz has more chance to fight. He fights wars against the Ottomans, he fights wars for the unification of Portugal with Spain, he does all sorts of different duties. So he has a lot of more experience in terms of combat. But I would say both him and Effingham are very skilled officers. The difference is that Santa Cruz, by the time we're talking 1588, apart from being 61 years old, has also reached the point at which even, arguably, Philip, his king, can't really tell him what to do. And this is the point we're going to get into the end, because at the end we're going to ask the question, or attempt to answer the question, that has often come about with Armada studies. Would it have been different if Santa Cruz had been in charge? And usually people go, well, he's the guy who wrote the doctrine. He's the guy who formed the fleet. They're executing his plan. So surely it wouldn't have been any different. The thing you always have to remember, though, is that Santa Cruz has the advantage of being senior enough, capable enough, unquestionable enough, that he can ignore his own plan. So if anyone can change, can adapt the plan in process, can make it viable, it's going to be him. But we'll talk about that as we go through and look at his experience, because he's an interesting soul. He truly is. He's Captain General of the Sea, he's General Admiral. His first service experiences are under his father, who's also a senior naval officer, and his grandfather had been a senior naval officer. This was a family who had traditionally been involved in the galleys, traditionally been part of the core fleet and core naval formations attached to Spain. And when I say Spain, we can take it back further to serving the Castile, the Crown of Castile, and they were senior Navarran nobility the family comes from, which, when you look at it, by the way, Navarre is right up there on the border with France, northern Spain. And yet, his first commission, technically, which is given to him when he's, I think, 8 years old, he's appointed military governor and captain of the fortress and city of Gibraltar. And by the way, Gibraltar never fell while he was in charge of it. Although his father did consider it an absolute joke. Honestly, he is from a long line of naval commanders. He's from a long line of commanders. His family are professional corps de military. They are warriors through and through, but they're also commanders through and through. And they carry out so much. Now, when we're talking about his own father, Alvaro de Bazan the Elder, oh, he had taken part in the siege of Fuenterbia. He had been promoted to General Captain of the Galleys of Spain in 1526. Think about that. 1526. He's 20 years old. He's put in charge of the General Captain of the Galleys of Spain. Now, admittedly, people didn't live as long in this time period as they do today, but he's already acquitted himself well if he's getting that role. In 1532, he captured the city of Array with just 10 galleys. Managed to finagle it so that the treasure he captured was used to increase the number of galleys available for Spain. In 1533, he captured Shameless in the Fulcavivas. He was an Ottoman corsair. 1535, he led the galleys as part of the campaign of Charles V versus Tunis. In 1536, he captured the flagship of the Argelian Navy and some of the French vessels that were trying to pillage Spanish coast. In 1539, well, he bought a load of villages off Charles V. And it's in that area that eventually his son, who we're going to be talking about, will construct his palace. In 1543, before the Battle of Muros Bay, he became Captain General del Mar Océan, Captain General of the Ocean Sea. And then goes and defeats the French Navy under Admiral Bray at the Battle of Muros Bay, where, by the way, his son is with him. In 1550, he was able to start building galleons and galleys of his own invention in order to protect the routes from the Indies from corsair attacks, aka Portuguese and Dutch, and English. 1550. And in 1554 to 1558, he was part of the force which defended the Spanish-American coast against attacks. He dies in 1558. And his son had experience with him. This man shapes this man, who was born in 1526. The same year, his father was made General Captain of the Galleys of Spain. He was 32 years old when his father died. 32 years old. He'd served most of his life at his side by this point. He'd been his right hand, which is not unusual, but at this point now, especially when you consider his uncles and the fates they'd had and his brothers and where they'd been fighting, yeah. There are issues going on. But now it all falls on Alvaro de Bazan the Younger, aka the future Marquis de Santa Cruz. Because it does all fall on him now to protect the family name, to keep promoting it, to keep working it up. And he does well. He does well. But let's start off with the Battle of Muros Bay, because it's worthwhile thinking about, because the French turn up with 25 warships. The Spanish was 16. The French lose. One of the things you note through their history of the Bazans, whether the elder or the younger, when they're in charge, and they're allowed to be in charge, they are ruthlessly efficient at winning battles. Absolutely ruthlessly efficient at winning battles. Now, the French had more ships at the battle, and this takes place in 1543. But the Spanish ships were larger, and this allowed them an advantage for boarding and for firing their guns. The Bazan led his men into battle personally, as did his son. 1543. For those thinking, hang on, Alex, how old was his son at this point? 17. This was the first battle where his son was, to an extent, exercising something approaching a command position rather than a support position. They both led boarding actions. They both were controlling guns. And one of the things that's worthwhile noting about this family is they have a history of a focus on gunnery and skill with guns and accuracy. I'm not talking Admiral Lee here, but I am certainly talking Admiral Collingwood's approach to gunnery. It needs to work. There needs to be adaptations to the ships, then the ships will need to be adapted. If there needs to be adaptations to the guns, then the guns need to be adapted. We need the guns to work. And what's really interesting about this battle is the Bazan, the elder, does a tactic which his son will later do to devastating efficiency. He focuses on the French admiral and the French flagship, and the leader of the other significant portion of ships. Because again, the French fleet, the Spanish fleet, they're rather like the English fleet. When I was talking about Howard of Effingham and how he manages the English fleet. There are warships here which are royal warships, but there are also quite a lot of warships which are personal warships. And one of the things that guarantees the Bazans their leadership positions is that they bring their own ships to the table. Yes, you're putting them in charge of other people's ships, but honestly, they also bring their own. They bring their own forces, their own capability. And that matters, because if they're going to be the centerpiece of your force, you need to work with them. You need to work with them. And at this point, the Bazan is in charge of his own ship. So is his son. They're both exercising authorities, running around. And the Bazan manages to ram and sink the French admiral's flagship. He boarded what is sometimes called a corsair, but probably should more be considered privateer, merchant for hire, naval warships for hire, leader Halbard's ship, and captured them. When we talk about it being a big battle, the French lost 3,000 dead, roughly. 3,000 taken prisoner, 23 ships captured, and 1 sunk out of 25. The Spanish had 300 dead and 500 wounded. It's a pretty brutal victory. And that's the methodology that he's raised his son in. His son, though, of course, is not his father. He's not at the same status level when his father goes. So, unsurprisingly, what his son then finds himself doing is doing independent patrolling and a few other duties, and slowly building up his forces, and slowly building up Gibraltar and a few other areas he's in charge of. And eventually he gets called up for the wars with the Ottomans. And when I say called up, that's when we start to see him featuring as a command position again. He's been a force commander, he's been a senior subordinate, but he's not really been mentioned in the operations in that period. There's a sort of 20-year period where, frankly, he doesn't get much attention, and suddenly he's all over the place. And those 20 years, he's basically being variations on third and fourth in commands of operations. He's still studying his craft. But it's at this point during the War of the Ottomans that you start getting him appearing as... Well, we have this guy who's a really good noble, who's a really dashing chap to be in charge. Yes. Absolutely dashing. Yes. Politically connected up the wazoo. Yes. Really, really smart, really educated. Yes. Can't command for a toffee. Who have you got who can manage upwards? That's the scenario you're dealing with. You've got, because of the size of forces you're dealing with, because of the feudal hierarchy, because of the scenario you're dealing with in Spain in this period, you have to fit a certain mold to be put in charge of these forces. You can either have such an overwhelming amount of experience and proven combat ability that, frankly, even nobles are going to go, yeah, we'll do what you say. Or you have to be a noble who is part of that group. In which case, if that's your commander, and you're sending him off to do things, you probably want to find someone who fits in the latter category, but hasn't got enough seniority, enough reputation yet, to be able to be in charge. And this is where Alvaro de Bazan the Younger, aka the Marquis de Santa Cruz, is going to become, fits in this period. We start to see this in this sort of period of the Ottoman Wars. There's a bonus fight with the English at Gibraltar, but we like these bonus fights. Now, what we have with these operations as they go on is a really interesting growth, because it starts out with the siege of Mers el-Kabir. Now, this is parts of the sieges of Iran and Mers el-Kabir, etc., that are going on, the Ottomans attacking. And the Bazan, as he's called, Alvaro de Bazan the Younger at this point, well, he gets involved when Mers el-Kabir is very much under siege, and they decide they need to they need to relieve it. And he's one of the commanders who's called up under Francisco de Mendoza Llagas. He spends quite a lot of time under the command of, but Hadivas Vargas does not get much of attention from history. It doesn't seem to have... He seems to turn up, do some things, but doesn't really get a lot that I can really follow and attribute as his own style of leadership. I can't put him up there and put him as an example of leadership, like I can with the Bazan's father. And he is being second, and this is the first time we have it now. It says Alvaro de Bazan is his second, along with Giovanni Andrea Doria. These two officers will second the Francisco de Mendoza. And part of that reason is because there's a first force of 34 galleys formed up. They come from Barcelona, Naples, Genoa, Savoy, Malta. Starting to realise you've got a very good officer, but an Italian Genoese admiral, Giovanni Andrea Doria. There's a reason the Andrea Doria class exists. There you go. And you've got the Bazan, who's the Spanish commander, or the Spanish forces. We've got an officer they're fighting under. It's fine, it's going to work. And they're taking 4,000 soldiers plus volunteer knights. And the whole reason is to sail to Mers el-Kabir and hopefully trap the Ottoman forces between them and the place they're besieging. And so the Ottoman forces withdraw. They withdraw. It's already been a hard siege. Now, the thing is, we find accounts of the Bazan has been agitating for this, arguing for this from quite early on. We find he's been arguing for this and saying we should respond more quickly. And Philip II has been his usual... Honestly, Philip II, he hesitates so long. By the time he takes a decision, the time for it's passed. Now, this then leads in 1563 to, very quickly, to the Penon de Valdez de la Gomera expedition, where, now at this point, it's under Sancho de la Vega and Pedro de Vangas. And Alvaro Bazan, the Bazan is pretty much along to, how do I put this politely? He's providing the galleys. They are taking a force of roughly 50 galleys with them. There is a discussion as to whether 8 of those are Alvaro de Bazan's, or all of them are Alvaro de Bazan's, and those officers involved are in command of the combined 7,000 troops and the galleys. What is known is that the galleys do pretty darn well. And without the galleys, the Spanish troops would have been annihilated. Because at several points, it's Bazan who causes things to be stopped. He uses his fleet to cover the troops. And he both covers their assault so they can actually land, and then when they withdraw, he's the one who covers it and withdraws of it. There are some interesting issues in this scenario because the Bazan is pretty mutinous, you could argue, in how he's approaching, because he's actually completely acting as if he's an independent force commander. He's supposed to wait for signals from senior officers to tell him what to do, and they're having councils, and the Bazan is the only one who's arguing against the leader in the councils. He's pointing out issues with the enemy supplies, pointing out if they actually carry it out properly, they could actually win it, and then when they carry it out half-heartedly and they need to be evacuated, he withdraws them. And so they pull back. And when he returns, well, he returns from that to Gibraltar. And in Gibraltar, he's in charge. Remember? He's in charge of it. It's his fortress. And he arrives. And he finds some interesting ships there that have been arguing with the French. The 8 English ships had attacked a French merchant vessel in the harbour of Gibraltar. The French ship had managed to take refuge under the fortress of El Puerto de Santa Maria, and from there, considering there was supposed to be a peace treaty between Spain and England, the local Castilian, to an extent the person who was running things at the fort, had tried to be a diplomatic intermediary between the two forces, only to be taken hostage by the English. The English were being really stupid. We don't even know who the leader of the English forces was. We don't even know if they had a leader. All we do know is that it ends with Bazan showing up with just 5 of his very well war-hardened galleys, absolutely caning the English, managing to capture all the vessels and 240 prisoners, seizing all their goods, and ending up with the ambassador from England to Spain trying to both claim that the merchants had been attacked by the French first, and they resisted arrest, and all these things to try and argue defence, while sending a full detail to Elizabeth I and writing a note to the prisoners, reprimanding them and calling them idiots. It's just a bad time had by all. The one thing that does seem to interest Bazan is he takes quite a keen interest in the English canon. Their shaping and form. He starts to look at this. But he already has his own ideas on this topic, so it's one of those things when people go, oh, he gets this from here or this from there. Just remember, he had quite a few of his own ideas, and a lot of what we're dealing with in this time period, especially when we're not talking about metallurgy or the advanced methodology of producing the cannon, etc. Talking about designing of carriages, etc., and systems to support the cannon. A lot of that's common sense. You're in a more narrow space, you might need a more narrow carriage. You're doing this, and it's also compromise. So, yeah. Anyway, next year, he's sent back. And this time, he's sent back with, well, how do I put this? To go and deal with the Penin de Vaz and the La Goma issue. one of the interesting things is that the command changes. For starters, whilst De Lea is still there is now Garcia de Toledo Osoro in charge, and the Bazan brings his old friend Andre Doria along with a couple of other quite experienced and capable personnel from the Kingdom of Portugal and the chapels and the Grand Duchy of Tuscany, etc. Scipiao Vitelli and Francisco Barreto. And so, how do I put this politely? Well, when De Levea decides that he's going to be doing things in an interesting fashion and is again going to be trying to do half-hearted, half-energetic things, he finds that A, the person in charge of him considers him a bit of an idiot, and B, this is more important, that commander seems to be more prepared to listen to the Bazan. And it's quite a quick battle in many regards. They're showing up with 93 galleys, 60 sailing ships, a land force of nearly 9,500 troops once you add in everything. And the forces of the Ottoman Empire that they are confronting are roughly 200 troops. They are supposed to get reinforcements. They do get some reinforcements, but it seems to be dribs and drabs in very little amounts. Honestly, it's rather like they fought before, but this time they're prepared to press it. The thing is, they kind of won it too well, because they not only took the fort, the relief army that came under Kara Mustafa was also routed, and to an extent at this point, Suleiman the Magnificent, of course, who's leading the Ottoman Empire at this point, gets really, really, really annoyed. And that's what leads to the Great Siege of Malta, which takes place in 1565. And at this point, the Bazan, he shows up mainly as someone who keeps shouting, we need to go support them, we need to go relieve them, this is a chance for us to cause a lot of damage to our opponents. But eventually, what does happen is he does manage to arrive. He does manage to arrive as part of the reinforcements that Spain eventually sends, and the only problem is that relief actually arrives 7th September. It arrives after the fight is over, after the siege is over. So it doesn't give the Spanish a victory, it doesn't give anyone really a victory. It means the Ottomans have lost, and you can argue that the Knights Hospitaller have won, and Malta has won. But in some regards, what they won was, okay, now we have to rebuild everything. And our enemy can come back, and they haven't really lost enough to actually deter them from coming back again. What they've learnt is this time they need to come back next time a lot stronger, with a lot more resources and a lot more infrastructure and a lot more sustainment. Now, after all this, well, you get onto the further Ottoman wars, and at this point, he gets one of his most favoured people he has to support, John of Austria, aka Don Juan de Austria. Now, whether or not Santa Cruz preferred Don Juan to his half-brother, Philip II of Spain, we can leave that to your own imagination. They do seem to have formed quite a decent partnership, working together against the rebellion in the Alpujarras. My Spanish is terrible. And the Battle of Lepanto, and the Conquest of Tunis. Now, ultimately, the first operation, dealing with the rebellion, well, that required naval power in order to actually operate. Its logistics was heavily naval dependent, And the fact it was as successful as long-term as it was because good old Alvaro de Bazan, aka the Younger, was able to successfully make sure no one could readily resupply the rebels from the sea. The Battle of Lepanto is even more interesting because when you have a battle like Lepanto, when you have something which is of such status history, people have studied it and have second studied it and third studied it and gone and Saturday night quarterbacked it to the nth degree. In many regards, the Battle of Lepanto is the ultimate example of how to organize a coalition, not a command structure, a coalition, and how to marshal it. And it is huge. It is huge. The fact that the Holy League win is mostly down to the fact that John of Austria is being supported by Alvaro de Bazan and a couple of other very experienced naval officers, including our other friend Giovanni Andrea Doria. Yeah, it's almost like someone went, so who are the two most experienced naval officers in this area? I'm going to grab them. I'm going to grab them and I'm going to bring them here. And they're going to be senior in advising me. It's always fun when you go through the rest of the commanding officers, their noble family, lord, great, Doge of Venice, all these things for this battle. And then you've got these two names sitting in there and you're going, and you two are designated killers, aren't you? And then you look at the battle outline and where they're positioned and how they're organized and you go, oh, you really are the designated killers. Really are the designated killers, because you have the reserve is under the command of de Bazan. The right is under the command of Andrea Doria. If you look at where de Bazan is, he's literally sitting behind John of Austria and able to cant behind Doria should they need it. They are the ones which are out to sea. They're the ones away from land. And those are forces which are critical because if anything happens, it's going to be down to the work of the Bazan to exploit it. So you need someone who's aggressive in charge of that reserve, and you need to make sure that, well, the right doesn't fall back. Because if the right falls back, then the Holy League forces could have ended up getting forced against the coast, and that could have led them to being wrecked. So again, it's putting experienced officers in the places they need to be. And once again, it's working to their advantages. When you start looking through the discussions and the councils and things going on with these two officers, they're the ones emphasizing logistics. They're the ones emphasizing organization. They're the ones bringing what I would call the professional for this period, the professional naval experience. There are lots of commanders. There are lots of generals. There are statesmen here. But naval officers, I would say again, of course, I'd always have to add the codicil about the Doges of Venice, that they are extremely interesting and they are the closest to probably the Roman Republic in their approach to generating their senior officers and their people like the Doge, etc. So you always have to add a little codicil when discussing them, going, yeah, they do have some experience. And also, of course, takes part in Conquest of Tunis. But this is really when we get to the end of talking about his formative years, and I'm going to have a shameless book plug before we get on to his own independent commands and what I think could have happened with the Armada if he'd been in charge. Shameless book plug is, of course, when I thank you all for your support. It's when I shamelessly plug my book, but also I say thank you for everyone for all the kindness you do to support this channel and make it grow, and thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing, all those things which help the channel grow. Thank you. Without you, this channel wouldn't be where it is, and it's a lot of fun to do. It's a lot of fun to be able to do the things I'm doing. And also probably where I answered the question of why I'm wearing the hat. Honestly, not that cold today, but the heating is currently turned off, and so I thought, just to make sure I don't get a cold or anything, I'll wear a hat to make sure I keep my head warm. Unfortunately, the only hat I could find was the one I've been using in the attic, which, look away now, you might get flashed. It's quite a cool hat, and it's rechargeable. I got it in the local, sorry. I got it in the local store. It's a little USB rechargeable. It is a cool hat. But yeah, so, sorry, this was all I could find, so I'm wearing it. Oh, just a bit of an explanation. I thought I should have one in here. Anyway, back to Marquis de Santa Cruz, and thank you again for all your support. It said it makes all this possible, and it wouldn't be the same without you. So thank you. Now, at the beginning, I said, a battle where a small number of ships took out a far larger fleet in a startling manner. Well, this battle, otherwise sometimes known as the Battle of Porto Delgada, the naval battle of Teresia Island, as I put it, the Battle of Vila, Franco de Campo, takes place off the Azores. It's part of the War of the Portuguese Succession, and you have on one side a Spanish sort of Portuguese force of 28 ships under Alvaro de Bazan. And on the other side, you have Pieros Rossi. He is the mercenary admiral. He is a very capable officer, but he is not probably as experienced in some ways as the Bazan. And a force of French, English, Dutch, and some Portuguese of, let's put it this way, not liking the unification with Spain Portuguese. Anyway, the Spanish have 28 ships. Let's call it, sort of broadly speaking, the Franco-Portuguese forces, because they are certainly supplying the bulk of it, have 60. And the point of the battle, realistically, is to decide the war. Because, as you can imagine, if you know about the geography of Portugal, if you can control the maritime side of it, if you can control that side, the naval side, the marine side, the Atlantic side, you can pretty much control logistics. And if you can control logistics, then you can dictate the pace of the battle. This was the whole problem for Napoleon later on with his forces in Spain as part of the Iberian Peninsula campaign. The fact is, as long as the Royal Navy had de facto control or control of the ocean, that meant Wellington's army and the various other British forces and Allied forces in the area could be resupplied at will where they needed to be, when they needed to be, without worrying so much about what the French might try and get up to. It's effective. It is effective. Now, the thing is, this is an interesting battle because it gives us an idea, I would say probably the most accurate idea, of how the Bazan might have fought the English, how he might have engaged during the Armada. Now, the Bazan had become Santa Cruz already in 1569. He'd done it before the Battle of Lepanto. He's gained this title earlier on. And in many ways, giving him the title of Marquis of Santa Cruz is a nice way of going, right then, he has experience, we want to give him a bit of enough noble title that he can also tell the nobles what to do if they're being annoying. It's not going to be the most senior noble title, but it's going to be senior enough that he can tell them what to do. And this is why he's at this battle. He's exercising sole command, and he's doing a good job. Also, what he's got is several Portuguese-built galleons. Now, these are often considered some of the finest vessels to be built, some of the heaviest vessels. They would carry lots of guns. They'd be very large, very powerful ships. The San Mateo, Mateus, is a vessel of roughly 750 tons, and the several points will hinge on that vessel as a linchpin. His own flagship, the San Martino. Great. pretty much, how do I put this politely? The Bazan uses her like his father used his ship at a battle a few back at the beginning of this video. He basically hunts down Strozzi's flagship and decimates that flagship. He is single-minded. In fact, the whole battle is, as I said, very interesting for your perspective, because there's an indecisive gunfight which takes place a couple of days beforehand. And then they get into a very fierce close fight. Now, the French initially had the advantage, but were unable to take the wind, but unable to take advantage of the sailing of their vessels and how they were capable of maneuvering, which allowed the Bazan, Santa Cruz at this point, to gain the wind and be able to turn the larger ships of his van into the French force, which meant that despite the Spanish being outnumbered, he is able to batter them with the French with superior artillery and board from a position of advantage. And once they board, they are able to do what they need to do. And this also enables his ships, when they are being boarded themselves, to better defend themselves, because they are larger, more fortifiable vessels in many ways. There is an advantage to height, even at this point. And one of the things the Bazan has is he has Captain Diego de Medro in charge of his galleys. And his galleys had got some very highly trained marine infantry. He was a good ally to have of the Bazan. He was very good for his formations and his kind of doctrine. So by using his Portuguese-built galleons and his galleys to their best advantage, he is able to strike a lot of blows into the enemy formation. He's able to break them up. He's able to use their numbers against them. He's able to use their tactics against them by closing them down. And ultimately, the Spanish lose 224 dead, 550 wounded. The Franco-Portuguese forces, 1,500 dead, 1,500 wounded, missing, captured, 7 ships missing, 4 ships sunk, 2 ships burned, and 4 ships captured. It's painful. It's a horrific loss for them. And as I said, it does realistically, when you start looking at the battle, it sets the stage for the next battle, which he commands, which is the conquest of the Azores. And again, this is a necessary operation. If you conquer the Azores, you can win this war, because the Azores are the last bit being held by those who are claiming the throne should not go to where the Spanish wish it to go. Spanish wishing it to go to Philip II of Spain, and some Portuguese wishing it to go, of course, to Antonio, the prior of Crato. An interesting individual. Anyway, he himself, Crato, is commanding at this battle, and he has roughly 9,000 troops and roughly 30 warships. The Bazan has nearly 12,000 troops, a couple of hundred shy, and 96 warships. And again, it's a very efficient operation. The army lands at 0300 hours, with Captain Diego de Medro leading the advance with his galleys to the beach. They tow in 4,500 soldiers. The beach is guarded by the Fort Santa Cruz, which had a French captain in charge. He had 150 to 250 troops. There's disputes of how strong the two Portuguese companies were. We know he had roughly 50 Frenchmen under his command. And one of the interesting things that happens is as they're going through, as the Spanish are approaching and getting visible at dawn, and they start firing the artillery, the French protecting the fort start firing the artillery. Well, they're passing close arquebus shot range, which is very close range. And the Bazan's flagship is actually focused on by this firepower, and its coxswain is killed not far from where the Bazan himself is standing. But with the 9 other galleys supporting him, the 2 other galleys still coming in, unable to get in there, they're firing enough artillery. They silence the fort. They silence it. And once they've landed, well, they quickly overrun the fort. And then, once ashore, Bazan brings forward his own artillery. He is fully competent in commanding a land battle, and he does. He's got experience doing land fights. He's quite happy to do this himself. He actually forms his army up into roughly 3 lines, with the Germans on the right, Spanish on the left, and the arquebuses forming a heavy force in the centre, broadly speaking. They moved up, and they kept attacking. Bazan keeps reinforcing his arquebuses, his pikemen, and keeps reinforcing his forces and slowly feeding his numbers into the battle, so he's got constantly fresh men coming through. So despite the fact the forces should in a way be even, the Franco-Portuguese forces are in many ways expending a lot of their strength quite early and quite quickly. And that's a problem. That is a problem. As the battle goes on, it gets worse and worse. It gets worse and worse for the Portuguese. And very quickly they start to flee. They start to realise that they can't deal with this force, that they are being surrounded, they are being choked. And even if they manage to hold off or win these fights, they're going to lose. And when Bazan manages to capture Angra, unhindered in any way, without anyone really stopping him or even pausing him, that is really the end. That is really the end. And at that point, whilst there are French forces trying to dig in, whilst Portuguese are trying to dig in, their soldiers are also mutinying and actually opening up negotiations with the Spanish to surrender. And soon, the battle's over. And the thing is, what's really fun is that quite a lot of the commanders involved on the fighting on the Portuguese side and the French side had relationships with the commanders on the Spanish side, thanks to their serving in the Great Siege of Malta, and they managed to obtain quite good terms because of this. They managed to attain quite good agreements because of this, which meant the Azores fell to Philip II of Spain as Philip I of Portugal. They were incorporated in the Kingdom of Portugal. And claiming possessions came, of course, the Spanish Empire. But it's all fun. Now, at that point, he's won a great victory. And yes, he's going to be involved in various little actions. But realistically, the first time we next hear about him is Drake visiting Lisbon during his great singeing of the King of Spain's beard. And pretty much what he does is turn up and see that Santa Cruz is building a mighty fleet. And there are problems from Philip and a few others who are upset that Santa Cruz does not take this mighty fleet out to fight Drake, but it's not ready yet. There's no point taking out a small number of ships to do this battle before they're ready. We're equipping them, we're feeding them, we're just going to waste men, material, and everything else. There's an exchange of artillery fire between the English ships under Drake and the shore defence batteries. But realistically, all you have is a nice message from Drake going to the Bazan, asking him for an exchange of prisoners, and Bazan responding that he wasn't holding any English subjects, and he was not preparing for any action against England. Technically he wasn't. As he would say, he's preparing for action against the Protestant Elizabeth I, false ruler of England. You have to remember the criteria here. Honestly, it's a bit of a pointless exchange on Drake's part, But it does cause problems. It does cause issues with Philip, and it's not long after this, in 1588, because it's February 1588 when he dies, that, there have been issues with Philip. Philip has always worried that the Bazan was a bit too independent, wasn't following his orders, and let's be honest, Philip is a weak man. He is not a good king in any stretch of the imagination. He's a very powerful king, but he is powerful because of the generations of work done by generations of his predecessors. It's kind of the example I would tend to give is people sometimes play a game called Crusader Kings 3. And a friend of mine has a great phrase. He calls it a generation game, not a playing game, where you concentrate on building up the wealth and power of your families through the generations, not on the individual. The individual matters less than the generations. Again, it's kind of Game of Thrones. It's what the period was like. And Philip II is an ultimate example of how this can work, of how the Habsburg rulers could achieve this. He himself is not that great, but he has a lot of resources, he has a lot of skilled commanders, and he has a lot of legacies built up from the generations by his predecessors that he manages to make advantage of. He manages to use. Two of them he deploys for this operation, theoretically, Santa Cruz and Duke de Palma. Now, the question comes at this point, if Santa Cruz lives, does he get the same problems? Well, one of the things I think that happens is a lot of stuff happens retroactively after he's dead and after the Armada fails. With the Armada failing, they're looking for someone to blame, and they're happy to shift a lot of the blame onto the Bazan, onto Santa Cruz, and try and say it was because he didn't follow through Philip's vision correctly. But I think the realistic thing is that actually the Bazan, if he'd have been in charge, whilst I can't see him really being able to do much more with the fleet the size he's going to do than to keep it together, I think he probably plays it a little bit different than it was done historically. Considering his amphibious warfare experience and his operational experience, I wouldn't be surprised if he landed on the Isle of Wight. I wouldn't be surprised if he was fully prepared to do his own operation. He's seen enough, he's experienced enough, unlike the Duke of Medina Sidonia, that he could do that. He's got a big enough army in the Armada that if he lands it on the shores of England, there are going to be problems. And he's capable enough of doing it that he could do that. And then just go, well, we've now offloaded the troops ashore. We can now use our ships if necessary, but we can use the warships to go and get Palmer and bring him across. Or he could send one of his deputies to go and get Palmer and bring him across, while he advances on London. I don't know if he would have changed the plans that much, but if you consider how often he argues for a more aggressive options, how often he's key in persuading Philip II to actually pursue those aggressive options, and how he approaches warfighting, where he really does like to efficiently go for the kill and aim for the enemy commander and take them out. His analysis is going to be that if he can take out Elizabeth I, or at least displace her and her cabinet from London, from the centre point, then that's going to win him the invasion. Getting Palmer's army across allows you to conquer the country. Great. That's a longer term operational requirement. Short term, to win it and decide the fate before it lasts that long, is take London and displace or kill the Queen. That sounds straight up his tactics. And as we were talking about in Effingham's video, realistically, the Armada managed to keep together quite well and hold off a lot of the English attentions right up until they have to anchor off Cadiz to try and organise themselves with Palmer. If they'd done this sort of operation, if Santa Cruz had gone against the plan, who knows? Medina Sidonia is never going to get against the plan. He's an administrator, not a naval officer or a general. He's an administrator, a very good administrator, but he's going to follow the plan he's been set. Because his view is he's been told to do what to do by people who are more senior than him, who know what they're doing better than he does. Santa Cruz, Alvaro de Bazan the younger, call him what you will. He's got enough experience. He's been fighting for long enough. He's done enough fighting. He's not going to believe there's anyone more experienced than him. And he's also going to fully understand the difficulties of doing the amphibious operation. Remember, he's used to complete command of his amphibious operation. That's what he achieved off Azores. That's what he's been doing, basically, in other operations. The idea of having to liaise with the Duke of Palma's army and, can't do anything till he can bring them ashore with him. What's the point? Secure the landing bay in England, secure the area, get the army ashore that he's got with him, and then then go get Palma. Also, that would have changed the battle completely. It would have changed the concept and the issues that the English were facing in the situation entirely. Now, admittedly, it might have meant they would use fireships earlier on any anchorage which is secured. But again, if you've got an anchorage where you are actively and rapidly offloading, you can put ships which have been offloaded at the outer points of your anchorage, so that any fireships hit them and don't necessarily get into the ships which are still loaded. There are options you can do. Again, it's not beyond the wit of the Spanish. They've done similar things to this before. It might make sense from administration sitting back in Spain and looking at a map of the world to go, no, we get there, we land, we combine we get these two armies together, and then we land. And that does sound great, but from a naval perspective, as we talked about before, the whole problem was the command of control and getting the communication between the two. Well, the easiest way to get the communication between the two and be in a position where you could land in England is if you've already landed in England. And then you can set up the comms, go back and forth, go, okay, now your ships need to get here. Tell me, I can send my warships over to you to wait with you, because I've offloaded enough from my transports that I don't need all my warships here. So my warships can come, help you, and you have to get through the shallows, yes, and past the Dutch forces, but there are going to be the big warships are going to be unencumbered and waiting for you. There are options. There are options. I don't know. The thing about it is people are right that the doctrine, the ideas, the tactics they're following are Santa Cruz's tactics. The Spanish are following his tactics. He's been the man who's been writing their tactics for the previous 20 years, and his dad was the guy writing the tactics before then. And that's who he learned from. But the thing is, those tactics are written, but the people who write the tactics, how do I put this politely? The person who's most likely to break a rule is the person who wrote it. Because they know the full context of the rule. And also, the hardest, toughest decision you will ever have is if you're in the final match of the championship or the Super Bowl or whatever it is, and you have to throw away all the game plan, all your methodology at halftime because what's got you there is not working. Well, the thing is, a really good coach, a really good leader can do that. But only someone who's completely and absolutely confident in their knowledge of their doctrine to understand what's not working. Santa Cruz, the guy who wrote the doctrine. If it's not working, who best to throw it away? Who better to go, this is not working here, let's change. And if you go, well, you're breaking doctrine. So what? It's my doctrine. I say it's not working. Does anyone here know my doctrine better than me? No. Now, here is the very interesting thing, though, about his legacy. The palace of the Marquis de Santa Cruz today houses the General Archive of the Spanish Navy. It houses the General Archive of the Spanish Navy, and it's a whole reason to visit that area, and it's an absolutely gorgeous archive. I've got friends who've been there, and they tell me it's wonderful, and I am massively jealous. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you found it interesting. That hopefully this will go up on time. It's been a bit jittery all day, and we've kept having had the power off, but hopefully things will be sorted out soon. And next week it is the Royal Navy College of Greenwich. Hope you're going to enjoy that. Anyway, thank you for watching. I always finish these videos with a question, and I'm going to leave it open to you, because the question is this: do you think Santa Cruz would have changed things if he'd been alive for the Armada? His style is very much go for the enemy flagship, and whilst I have a feeling that would probably involve Lord Howard of Effingham having a very personal fight with him if it got into a gun duel, he can't really do that and escort all those transports. But on a broader broader style, I think he can go for the jugular, go for the head, if he goes straight for a landing in, I would say, the Isle of Wight area. It's a nice sheltered bay that he could bring his ships into. Portsmouth, Isle of Wight area. Certainly aren't a lot of defences there. He could try and go for the Thames estuary, but the thing is, once you hit there, you've then got problems going back the other way with the winds and the tides, and the currents in the channel, and narrows of the channel. So I think he'd go for the Isle of Wight, because also then there's the option that if he wants to, he can do the second landing of the army on the Essex coast, on the Essex Kent coast area, and bring Palmer's army across there, and then you've got two large armies trying to meet up with each other. There again, that does introduce communications issues, but once both armies are on the same body of land, that actually becomes easier, because you stick people on horses and you tell them to ride fast, and hope they make it. And hope they make it. Anyway, thank you for watching. I said next week's going to be the Royal Naval College Greenwich, what it existed to, how it trained leaders. Should be a fun one. Thank you very much for watching, and take care.